Chassidus Applied, episode 509. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes Aleha Shalom and in merit of Baruch ben Yomim ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todris ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. So we have emerged from the 9 days from Tisha B'Av and now entering into we'll call it the zone of transformation as we lead tonight into Chamisha Asar B'Av, the 15th of Av, the full moon of the month of Av. And the words of the Mishnah and the Gemara, Lo Yehoyi Yomim Tevim Li-Yisrael, says Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, Ki Chamisha Asar B'Av, Ki Yom HaKippurim, equating the 15th of Av to the holiest Achaz Bashana, the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur itself. And the Gemara goes on to explain the different reasons for this. What do we learn from that? And how do we apply that to our lives in the context of Chassidus Applied? It's a good place to begin and open this program. And especially in context of events in our lives. Remember, Torah Melosh Nehira. Everything in Torah is a directive, a guide, instruction, life's operator's manual. Torah is life's operator's manual that Hashem Himself gave us to guide us and direct us and illuminate. Torah Eir and Torah Chaim illuminate the path of life in a confusing world, in a confused world. And darkness, we need those cosmic headlights that the Torah provides us to find direction. And indeed, we're living in a world of plenty of confusion, plenty of misinformation, disinformation, false narratives, threats, more than threats, true challenges, unfortunate tragedy and atrocities that go back not just to October 7th, we call Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah, but long before that, and Aleinu after that as well. We have still hostages and being held by our enemies, the threats from Iran. So how do we look at all of that in the context of, through the eyes and context and lens of Torah? And the answer is very straightforward. The Torah covers all cycles of life, the ups and downs, the twists and turns. We're coming from the 9 days, before that the 3 weeks, the saddest time in the calendar, which reflect the saddest times in our lives. When there's that energy, the divine energy is more concealed, to the point where there could be the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the other tragic events that happened, punctuated by the bookends of Bein HaMetzarim, the dire straits of Shivasa B'Tammuz on one end, and Tisha B'Av on the other. However, it's all in the words of the Medrash Yalkut Shmeini, as the Rebbe would often quote, that Boare, in the month of Aryeh, which is the month of the lion of Ov, came the Aryeh, the lion called Nebuchadnezzar, and destroyed the Aryeh, Ariel, the Beis Hamikdash called lion. Almanas, on condition, like we say, Seisel Almanas Livnes, we raise a building with a Z, we destroy a building in order to build a better one. Almanas that Yovei Aryeh, that the Eibishter is called Aryeh, Aryeh Sharig Milayira, will come in the month of Aryeh, of and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi. So that's how we have to look at it as we come from Tisha B'Av. So all sad events in our lives, and all challenging events, and threatening events, what it needs to tell us is that's one half of the narrative. Like Rabbi Akiva saw the second half, and that's what made him laugh. The second half is the building. And that's indeed what happens as we come out of the 9 days out of Tisha B'Av. Even Tisha B'Av itself, as we discussed last week, is the birthday of Mashiach. That's why we say Nachem, the comforting prayer of Nachem in the afternoon, even though the flames were at their highest, as they were consuming the holy temple, tragically. But that very moment is the birthing of Mashiach, of Geula. And when does it begin to emerge, especially as we come to the 15th of Av, which is exactly how the Arizal explains, why indeed is it such a great Yom Tov? Yom Kippur, we understand. But why the 15th of Av, Chamisha Asar B'Av? Because it's coming after the tremendous and tragic ploim, as he said, as Malchus, what he calls, descended and was injured and wounded. The Pegam HaMalchus, Pegam HaLevona. On Tisha B'Av, 9, lacking the 10th. The 10th was hurt and wounded, which is the Shechina v'Shechanti b'Seichem of the Beis Hamikdash. So in direct proportion to that is Yeridat Tzedek Aliyah. The Aliyah is always in proportion to the descent. The descent was so deep, so the Aliyah, the 15th of Av, is greater than all the 15ths of each month, even though they all reflect the full moon. The Yichud Shimsha V'Sira, the unification between Mashpia and Makabel, between Zah and Malchus in the language of Chassidus, that is the full unification of sun and moon reflecting on a full revelation, which of course is giving us a taste of the Gula Mitzis V'Ashlema when there'll be Kaimasira V'Shlemusa, V'Hoya Era Levona Ke'era Chama, as the verses and the prophecies tell us. So the moon, the full moon, reflects the completion and the repair of Malchus, but not just Malchus, the Malchus that was injured and was wounded and was hurt and even destroyed in some ways on Tisha B'Av. And that's the lesson we learn for our lives today. So no matter what is happening in the world, obviously we need to be prudent and we need to be alert and we need to prepare ourselves in every possible way, like Yaakov Avinu prepared himself, through prayer, through war, through appeasement when needed, not appeasement out of weakness, appeasement out of strength, and in every possible way. But we have to also know that we stand strong because we stand with Hashem. And when you're tied above, you don't fall below. That's the lesson we take, especially in this time of year. Because we're exactly at that type of juncture. On one hand, experiencing such negative things. On the other hand, leading us to the 15th, to Chamisha Asar B'Av. And what do we do about it in our own personal lives? Besides Amunah and B'tachim, or in addition, I should say, not besides, in addition to our faith and our trust in God and binding ourselves, is Achdus. What destroys Malchus? What destroys the Beis Hamikdash? When the family is not united. When the children are not sitting and in love and in peace with each other, in harmony with each other, the father cannot be there. Barchenu Avinu, only when it's Kulanu Ka'echad. What's the tikkun? Echad. Kulanu Ka'echad. To demonstrate even more than ever our care, our love, our unconditional love, our baseless love, just like Sinas Chinam in the negative side, our unconditional love on the positive side, for each and every Jew, no matter who they are, whatever their background. You can disagree with someone, but it could be with love. A unity that becomes the keli, machzik bracha, the keli that contains and draws down the greatest blessings, and above all the blessings of Geula, because Geula is a direct result. When you correct the mistake, when you correct the botla hasiba, is botla masubav. You get rid of the cause that caused the destruction, then you have the binyan. That's why every generation that does not rebuild the base of Midrash is as if they destroyed it, because it's in our hands to create that unity, to do what we have to do, to be a keli and be worthy and merit to have the gula hamitis v'ashlem. So our work is cut out for us. The lesson is cut out for us. That's the immediate lesson from the 15th of Av. What does the 15th of Av teach us today? Exactly that. No matter how dark it is, no matter how the moon can disappear and be completely visible, it is reborn, and more than reborn, it becomes full. And that's indeed as the Gemara says, that when they saw that year, Chamisha Asar B'Av, the last year in the Midbar, the Gzeira was over. That decree that the Jews would no longer die in the Midbar ended. So that Chamisha Asar B'Av revealed, the full moon revealed, that we have reached a point where we're ready to move forward on the positive end of things. And after all the years of Golus and all the years of suffering, yes, we're ready to preach, to receive the Geula. And that's the thing. The Gemara also tells us, as far as lessons from Chamisha Asar B'Av, a practical hira, as the nights begin to get longer in Israel. So So you would think the nights get longer, that's a sign, a longer night. Night is a sign of helam, of concealment. When the sun is shining, that's when you have more revelation, as Chassidus says in Maimorim, that in the summer it's easier to serve Hashem. So you think night reflects more golus. Says says the Gemara, that the nights were created in order to study. It's an appropriate time. It's a fitting time. It's conducive when it's darker and you have more. You're not so involved in the social world and all that's going on, the hoo-ha of the world around us, it's a time to be able to contemplate and be more meditative and more introspective. So that's how we use the night. We illuminate the night with Torah Eir. Starting to learn more Torah. Of course, from Chamisha Asher B'Av, we continue all the way into the month of Elul in 2 weeks, which is Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, Chedesh HaRachamim, month of compassion, when what happens? When God reveals the 13 attributes of compassion to Moshe Rabbeinu, as well as a tikkun, again, the concealment, the destruction that was created by the breaking of the tablets as a result of the golden calf, terrible sin, Yareg Val Yaver, idolatry itself. And Moshe Rabbeinu was able to beg and ask and gain forgiveness when? On Yom Kippur. You see the common denominator, Yom Kippur and Chamisha Asher B'Av. So what's the connection between the two? Both of them reflect the aliyah that comes after our Yerida, reflect the transformation that comes, the reconciliation and transformation that comes after a break, after a betrayal, after a violation. Yom Kippur, Shalachti Kidvarecha, Hashem says, I forgive them, as you've asked, after their terrible sin. Chamisha Asher B'Av is the beginning of the process. 80 days after the Shchei Shel, I should say 80 days after Shavasa B'Tammuz, the 40 days till Rosh Chodesh, and then another 40 days till Yom Kippur, you have the full transformation. The second luchas are given, and then we celebrate Sukkot, climaxing and leading finally up to the apex on Shemini Atzeres Simchas Torah, which is what the first anniversary this year will be of the tragic atrocities that happened in Eretz Yisrael that day. So it's all about transformation. This is not minimizing or ignoring or explaining or rationalizing the negative. It's looking at life in the bigger narrative, bigger story going on. It's moving. It's a moving narrative. It's an unfolding narrative, and we're part of it. And our attitude is critical. Tach Gud v'Zayin Gud, how we think, our attitudes, what we produce, what we generate, has an impact on all of this. We're not just bystanders experiencing it. Our attitude in appreciating these days of the year and understanding the descent as a stepping stone toward a great ascent, a Yerida, as a stepping stone and catalyst to a great aliyah, is vital in this process. So having even more simcha and more betach and more trust and more joy and more faith and more connection. That's what we do when things are darker. We dig deeper and we increase and we double and triple and quadruple and do even more to counterbalance the darkness. So the more violence, the more pain, the more darkness, the more hate, the more death, the more we celebrate life and love and connection. They're bringing godliness and Torah and mitzvahs and virtue and chesed and yesha to the entire world. That's the way we fight the ultimate war. And when you go with that type of arsenal, there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. We're not going alone. We're marching as God's soldiers. Obviously, as I said, we have to do whatever it takes also on a physical level, on a military level, on a diplomatic level, but always out of strength. That's what has to be, especially when you're dealing with sworn enemies. Only strength works. As soon as there's even a drop of weakness, that's what they'll pounce on, because they're enemies. They're sworn enemies. They're looking to find ways to hurt. So Hashem should protect Eden everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael. Should finally release those hostages. All hostages. All innocent people, men, women, and children. And we should be zecher takeh before even this day, Chamisha Asher B'Av, ends to the full Gula Mitzvah Shlema Shehem Asidin L'Schadish Kamesa, that the Jewish people and the entire world, for that matter, will experience renewal, divine renewal, in a higher state of consciousness and awareness. Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Layom Mechasim, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So this is an overall lesson that we learned from this time of the year. Let's go through a few questions that came in, and many questions keep coming in. Here's a good opportunity to thank you for all your questions and submissions and comments and challenges. It's all part of this process. I see this as an interactive partnership. And it's your questions and your comments that really drive this program and have been driving it for over 10 years, 11 years now. We're already in over 500 episodes, 509th episode. So you go to chassidussupply.com. We've created an entire website dedicated, firstly, to a forum where you could submit any question anonymously, completely confidentially. We can't even see who written it. If you want us to know who you are because you want a response or in any other way, you just have to add your email address or other contact information. And you'll also find there archives of all previous programs and all other activities around many resources, Hasidic resources, different Maimorim and Chassidus, Ayin Beis and Samach Vav and Sadik Dalet and more. Check it out, chassidussupply.com. And with that, let's take a few key questions that were asked. I say key because many questions come in. The only downside is that the questions come faster than I'm able to provide answers simply because of time limits. So I apologize for anyone if your question has not been answered yet. Don't think it's been ignored. It's all there. We're just trying to organize it, keep it prioritized based on time, based on other factors, and deeply appreciated, as I said. Okay, so somebody asked this question now. How do we reconcile saying there were no greater holidays than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur with the rule that we must diminish in joy when the month of Av enters? Mishanichnas Av mamayit besimcha. I mean, Nichnas Av doesn't say a limitation, doesn't say until when, doesn't say only to the 9th of Av. And then we say, Lo Yom Tev Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. Then the Chamisha Sabav. The way a person wrote it would be as follows. If the Talmud tells us clearly that in the month of Av we must diminish in joy, why then would Rab Shimon ben Gamliel be quoted as teaching the two most joyous holidays are the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur? Does he not realize the 15th of Av is in the month of Av, in which we are required to diminish in joy? Why would a tzaddik go against the Torah, which teaches us to diminish joy in the entire month of Av, and teach everyone to be joyous on the 15th of Av? What's going on here? So you can imagine that this is not just a klotz kasha, it's an obvious question. Of course, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel knew what the month of Av is, and what Tisha B'Av is. So similar to what we spoke about Rabbi Akiva. When it says Rabbi Akiva laughed, and his colleagues cried, people misunderstand. It doesn't mean Rabbi Akiva did not cry. Of course he cried. Tisha B'Av requires crying, mourning. There's halachas around it. Beis Hamikdash, you see the Churban Beis Hamikdash, there's halachas of rice and kriya and other things. Rabbi Akiva added that dimension, that in addition to the crying, he laughed because he understood and saw the vision of where this is leading to ultimately. And it's not a contradiction. We say, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, serving God b'simcha. It doesn't say all days of the year except on Tisha B'Av. However, how you celebrate b'simcha and Tisha B'Av is different than you do on Purim. Similar to what we say, Tisha Gilu B'Rada, that the Gil, the celebration, is with trembling. Every serving of God, when you follow what God says, there's a simcha involved. Even if Hashem says, when that Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested and they asked him, do you know where you are? They wanted to intimidate him. So he says, yes, I know where I am, in a place that's potter for a mezuzah. What's potter for mezuzah? A bathroom? Or a stable. He was essentially insulting them. So the Rebbe explains, by saying that, the Frierdiker Rebbe was being mamshech ha'alacha. Just as the Eibishter says, put on a mezuzah, fix a mezuzah, place a mezuzah in a room that needs a mezuzah, he's telling you, do not place a mezuzah in other places. That's also a din. So it's also mamshech halakus. So halakus, you could be mamshech through a positive way. You could be mamshech by refraining from something. So there's always simcha. The question is in what form it takes. As the Rebbe emphasizes, we have to use that by learning Torah and being mekayim mitzvahs. Even when it says you're not supposed to learn certain parts of Torah on Tisha B'Av, but you can learn about Avelis. Moed Katan. Echa. That's also learning Torah. So it all depends on what form it takes. So going back to this, Rab Shimon Gamliel, Chamisha Sabav is saying that in addition to the fact that we know Mishanichnas of Mamayitim B'Simcha, so number one, indeed, it does stop after Tisha B'Av. Api halacha, after that, you don't have to diminish in Simcha as you do in the 9 days. It's true, on Tisha B'Av, the next day, we still have certain Hagbolas, limitations. So that's on a very basic level. But it is still the Pshat Mishenichnas Av seems the whole month of Av, because the whole month of Av, like we said, is the month of Aryeh. It's a month of destruction. But at the same time, it's also a month of building. And that's what Rab Shimon ben Gamliel comes to add. And the Mishnah and Gemara come to add. That there's also a Chamish Asar B'Av in the picture. And the moon will become full. And this will lead to the end of the month and will become a bench Chedesh Elul. And as the Shalah brings, that Tzemach Tzedek cites, Shem Kadmoinim, that the month of Aryeh, which is the month of Av, is a Rosh Tevis, an acronym of the word Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shana Rabbah, all born out of Av. So Rab Shimon ben Gamliel is coming to reveal, number one, what happens after 9th of Av. Number two, the previous kavanah, the intention of all the negative is also to bring to Chamish Asar B'Av, as the Arizal explains it. And therefore, it's not a contradiction. In addition, of course, to the word of the Minchas Elazar, the Muktzar Rebbe, Mishenichnas Av, Mamayetin, we're Mamayet. We diminish in the matters of Av, Besimcha through Simcha. Again, Simcha Api Alacha. And that is permissible and allowed in these days. And that's even, we're talking about the first 9 days. Allah Kama for sure the later part of the month. Now, there may be more explanations on this. I would love to hear if anybody wants to contribute to this and add. Please just submit it again to chassidusapplied.com in the forum. I'll be happy to share that in the next program or programs. Another question that came in is this. Why did we break the axes on this day and not just put them away to be used the next year? Referring to the Gemara says that the 15th of Av, Chamish Asar B'Av, was also called Yom Tabor Magel. In Aramaic, Tabor means Shviris. Magel is a axe. Yom Shviris HaKardim. Basically, the breaking of the axes. Why? Because since the summer begins to, the nights begin to get longer, and the sun therefore shines a little less time. So the dry season, which really creates the best type of firewood, is throughout the summer. But Chamish Asar B'Av, as the night begins longer, the sun is not shining with the same intensity and the same length. So the wood can maintain a little more moisture. Not immediately that day, but it begins that in that period. So therefore, since they cut trees for the wood in the Beis HaMikdash, and you want the wood in the Beis HaMikdash to be the most pristine, most in its highest quality, meaning wood that burns well and smoothly, without moisture, without worms, without other things. So as of Chamish Asar B'Av was designated, we don't cut any more wood for this season. So they broke symbolically the axes to show we're no longer cutting down the wood to be used, and we use the wood that was cut till now, and next season will begin again when the summer begins again. So the person is asking the question, why break the axes? Might put them away to be used next year. More in detail. When we finish reading the Torah on Simchas Torah, for example, we don't break the Torah scrolls and write new ones for the next year. We use the same Torah and roll it back to the beginning. What is the significance of breaking the axes on the 15th of Av? Wouldn't it make more sense to keep those axes and use them again the following year? So a few points that come to mind. First of all, it comes to Torah Chaim. Torah is all about life. An axe, as we know, and that's why you're not allowed to bring barzel, metal, in the Beis HaMikdash, because an axe also has the element that could be used for cutting down trees, but it could also be used for war, as a weapon. So in general, it's not seen as a totally positive thing, an axe. And as such, even though these axes were used, you can't compare it to Torah, just use it again. So there's also an element of here that once we don't need it, we eliminate it. We don't need to save axes. We save Torah, we save positive things. That's the immediate Baal Bater's explanation that comes to mind. Obviously, you start digging a little deeper. In general, cutting something down, a tree, even though it's for a good purpose, but it has, as we know, the story of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was once given a gift, a tobacco box, a snuff box. For Shmek Tabak, so it was like a tobacco box. The Alter Rebbe said, by the Chet Eitzadas, it corrupted all the senses except Chush HaReach. The taste, touch, sight, and sound. All of them were corrupted by the dialogue between the serpent, with the Nachash, and Chava, and Adam, but not smell. So you want to now also corrupt the Schush as Areach. So Tzemach Tzedek says, what did the Alter Rebbe do? He didn't throw out the snuff box. He took the snuff box, took out the hinge, and used it as a mirror to check his film to make sure they're centered properly. Tzemach Tzedek added, well, there's Zayda is nicht gemein shayches to shvira. The Zayda was not shaykh to breaking something. Everything was tikkun. So instead of breaking it, he took out the hinge and used the door, used the handle, or used the cover as a mirror. Breaking in general is necessary when you have to correct something. Tikkun. Like I mentioned, seisra manas livles. You break something in order to make it better. The breaking of the axe, however, being that an axe is an axe, so you have the concept, like he says in Tanya, he brings from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, explaining why Avadya is the greatest prophecy about Mashiach is the ger. It comes from a convert, Avadya. Because when you want to cut down a tree, you have to use the axe to cut down that very tree. Like Resapche. You use the thing itself against itself. It's similar to the concept of antibiotics or homeopathy. So the idea of cutting down is important when it comes to having to break something that it's initially has a problem, like I mentioned before about an axe. So you could add into the whole equation that there's something about breaking the axes themselves, because they are things that break. They cut down a tree. So even though it may be for good purpose, but bottom line is they are tree cutters. And as such, you want to transform that and eliminate that. So some explanations to help understand this process. The connection to us is that, that may all the weapons, that all the weapons should be transformed into plowshares. May the swords be turned into plowshare and the axes into positive forces that only are for humanitarian and positive causes, which is part of what we want to achieve in this time of history, with all the challenges and wars that we're facing. Okay. Since we're coming also from Shabbos Chazain last week, Shabbos Nachmu, but before that was Shabbos Chazain, and we're still talking about the Beis HaMikdash. Obviously, we'll continue talking about the Beis HaMikdash until we actually have it. And these weeks are all weeks of comfort to help us rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. So let's address, I don't see the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos Chazain. What am I doing wrong? Every year on Shabbos Chazain, I look out my window to try to see the third Beis HaMikdash, but I don't see it. What am I doing wrong? This is based on the Torah of the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever on Shabbos Chazain, the Lashon Mechza. The name of Rabbi Hillel Parashah says it, the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever, that every Shabbos Chazain, every year is shown from a distance the third Beis HaMikdash in order to arouse and stimulate gaguyim, yearning, in order to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash Ashlishi through our good actions, that they become part of our hergel. Okay. So now, interestingly, I think I mentioned this maybe in one of the programs recently or before or earlier than that, and that is a story that happened with myself in Tov Shem Mem Zayin, when I prepared the Sikh of Shabbos Chazain and this Torah, and there was asking the question essentially, if nobody sees the Beis HaMikdash, what's the point of showing it? And the Rebbe explained the whole arichas. The way we wrote the Sikha, it came across incorrectly, obviously, that it sounded like, and the Rebbe wrote, Kenira, that the Reishim, the person who wrote the Sikha, saw the Beis HaMikdash himself. The Rebbe was saying it, I don't want to say the word sarcastic, but it was with tongue-in-cheek, let's put it that way. Because the Rebbe's main point is that you see the effects on us. So you're doing nothing wrong. The point here is not to have just a vision of a Beis HaMikdash. The point is its effect on us. If you see something in the sky, you have a dream or you have a vision, if it doesn't affect you, what's the point? The whole point of showing the Beis HaMikdash is that it should impact us, that we should correct our ways, liyashas haderech, as he explains, and repair everything possible so the Eibishter should give us the Beis HaMikdash Ashlishi. That's where you see the difference. That's what requires Avodah. That's the Rebbe's main emphasis. So I wouldn't feel bad because none of us see it. But we could see, if we contemplate properly, we could see the effect of it and the yearning and the longing that it should affect us, and especially in how we repair our ways in our actions. Okay. Who will build the third temple? Good question. Will the third Beis HaMikdash be miraculously lowered from heaven to earth? Or are we supposed to fundraise and buy the building materials and hire architects and skilled laborers to build it ourselves? If the idea of revealing the era of Mashiach is based on our work of purifying the physical world, since it's based on our work, then maybe it makes sense that we have to build the Beis HaMikdash ourselves. What does Chassidus answer to these questions? It's a very good question. The Rebbe Taka addresses it. There are seemingly contradictory Maimorei Chazal, sages. If you look in the Rambam, it says, Migdash, Bona Migdash Bimkemi, that Mashiach will build it. In some places it says that the Migdash is Bona Meshuchel, it's already ready built, and it's just waiting to come down, to descend below. So the Rebbe explains in several ways, but two ways. One is Zochu and Le Zochu, like in many series. If we merit, then it'll come down min hashamayim. We won't have to build. If we don't merit, we have to build it. Another explanation, it says the amudim, the pillars we will put up. Once you put up the pillars, it's considered as you did your part, and then the Beis HaMikdash Shlemayla will come down lamata. So bottom line is that it's not a contradiction. Both things will happen. Something needs to be done, our effort below. It could be our Maseinu V'Avodesenu, could be the pillars, some effort, but the primary Beis HaMikdash is ready to come down any given moment. It's already. That's essentially the answer for it. What it means in Aveda is that we always need something on our part. But remember, we have done a lot of work. We built a Migdash and Mishkan, V'shechanti b'seichem b'seich kol echad v'achas, within our hearts and souls. That's part of the work that we do. Building a Migdash from our spiritual Migdash within ourselves. The other things we do, whether it's Avos Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael, whether it's the other mitzvahs, especially those that have a special virtue that brings geula, that speeds up geula, like tzedakah, and so on. So all those things are kelim that we've created that allows that Beis HaMikdash Hashlishi which is Migdash Adnei Kini Yadecho, to descend below. So that's this general answer, and it comes down to, obviously, the more we do, the better it is. And it comes down to, after all these years of all the work we've done and all the sacrifices, so we've done our part. We're ready to receive the Gilim Mamayla with a little effort that we have to still make, even the Etzba Ketana, or the Amudim that we have to put up, the pillars. Okay. This week is also the second week of Shiva de Nechemta, second week of the weeks of comfort. So we're in Parshas Eikev. So let's talk about Eikev. What do we learn from Parshas Eikev? So in general, Eikev has many, many lessons, obviously, in this parsha, which include the name of the parsha itself, Eikev. Eikev means because you will. But Eikev, the Mefarshim explain, also comes from the word like Yaakov, Eikev, from heel. And that's where it connects it to Mashiach. The connection to Ikvus of the Mashiach. So the question is, how is this Pasha connected to Mashiach? So the answer is Ikvus of the Mashiach. But that brings us to another question. Why is the time before Mashiach called Ikvus of the Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach? Seemingly, the heel is the lowest part of the body. But that's exactly the point. You might have heard the expression, no, it's seifim b'tchilosam b'seifim. Or Nas Chilosam B'Seifim. The beginning is wedged in the end, and the end in the beginning. Another expression, Seif Maisa B'Machshavat Chila, we say Friday night. The end of the action originates in the beginning of the thought. So there's something about the end and the beginning that are connected to each other. That's why Maskifin Ascholol Ashlama, when we finish the Torah and Simchas Torah, we right away begin from Bereshis, even though we just finished Zeis HaBrach. And the same thing when you make a Siyum on Shas. So there's something about the end connected to the beginning. The same thing in Aveda. For the Mashiach to come, it's not just enough to have the earlier generations. We need to have till the end process. You want to elevate the whole picture, as the Alter Rebbe says, we elevate the building from the bottom. Ikvus HaMashiach reflects a double side. On one hand, it's the end of the process. On the other hand, it's the bottom of the process. And when you transform that, we then can cover the whole Geula. Ikvus also reflects on the Akev, as in the context of the end process, meaning like the Akev. So it says in Kabbalah, Chassidus explains it, that the entire history is like Seder Shtalshlos begins from the Reish, where Adam HaRishon is compared to the head. And the generations that follow go down the body all the way down to the Akev, with Ikvus and Mashiach being the last generation, the heel. And like a heel has the least amount of life vitality. It says in Ovis the Rab Nosson that every part of the body reflects another part of the cosmos. And the Malach HaMova Sheba Adam, that's the heel, the Akev, Sheba Regel. That's why you see the Akev is so least sensitive part of the body. You want to put your foot in hot water. When you want to test whether it's hot water, you put your heel, because the heel has more is more callous, if you wish. That's why we walk on our heels. Other parts of the body would not be able to tolerate walking on the ground. On the other hand, that's the heel has the least amount of giluyim. It's a sinulirina, we don't see revelations. But on the other hand, it's the Akev that is connected to Mesiris Nefesh. That dafka in the later generations, where you don't have the revelations that were there in the Deir of the Beis Hamikdash, or the Deir Deya, where Chesed and Gvura reigned, or the Deir Deya, where Chabad reigned in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. When you have the least amount of Gili, as the Alter Rebbe says, that Moshe was onov mipnei kol adam asher, mipnei adam asher al pnei adama, that he was the humblest before every person on earth. He was humblest for Ikvus of the Mashiach. When he saw Mesiris Nefesh, where you don't see the Giluim, you don't see necessarily the level of scholarship or the level of emotional piety and reverence and love of God, but you see simple dedication, simple effort of the foot soldier, Ikvus of the Mashiach. So it's the bottom that picks up the whole building. And that has a power to reach the Etzem, like the Baal Shem Tov says on Tefillah La'ani. So nafshi, so he says, Tefillah La'ani, Dafka Ani. And he explains, because the two people were invited to see a king. One was an aristocrat, an educated scholar. The other was a simpleton, a pauper, a Ani, illiterate. Comes the educated one, the Talmud Chacham, and he sees the palace. He never saw such a beautiful palace. The art, the music, the literature, the collections. He gets so distracted by the time he realizes that he misses the appointment with the king. Comes the Ani, he walks right through all these chambers, he doesn't appreciate it. He goes straight into the king's inner sanctum, and there he asks for everything. He touches the Etzem, including all the Giluyim, all the revelations. So the Baal Shem Tov says, when you stand before Hashem, suspend all your sophistication. This is not endorsing illiteracy. It's telling us, put it aside, because you want to connect to the very Etzem. And that's what the Akev does. It's a keli. Not just because it's lacking gloom, it's a keli for Etzem, Mesiris Nefesh. So this Pasha emphasizes that aspect, Akev Tishmun, the concept of Ikvus of the Mashiach that connects to the Geula. Okay. Let us now move over to some of the more recent events happening in the world, which is the war being fought in the Middle East, etc. So, many questions that keep coming in. Let's talk about the war in Eretz Yisrael. Should we be concerned that our lack of unity may negatively impact today's events? Thank you so much for allowing us the space to be able to ask questions and gain clarity in the right direction and perspective according to Chassidus. A war question. We know that unity unites us and gives strength. Should we be afraid of Chaz v'Shol, something happening not in the way we want because Jewish people are fighting? Should we be scared of what the results could be, or we're hoping for the best? Thank you. So frightened and scared is not an approach in Judaism. We shouldn't be scared of things. If something concerns us, we should do something about it. Not about being frightened or scared. Like the Rambam writes in the beginning of Hilchos Tainis, do something about it. Be more introspective. Look into your own heart and see if you could add in unity. So the answer is not about being afraid. It's about doing something about it. So by all means, we must make a revolution, literally nothing less than a revolution, in Achdus and Ahavas Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael. Inviting people you may not have invited, people that you may not know, people you may not even respect. Now, obviously, we're not talking about putting yourself in any danger. But in general speaking, if every Jew who keeps Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael, or anywhere in the world, would invite neighbors that don't yet do that, you don't think it'll make a difference? It'll change the entire landscape. This is the Tzava Shah. This is something we must accomplish. When you have enemies that are uniting us in their hatred, then we have to unite ourselves with love even more than their hatred. That's the call of the hour. It's always necessary. It's always Zeklal Godel B'Teira Haftarecha Kamecha, Rabbi Akiva says. And Zui Kol HaTeira Kula in the words of Hillel, that this is the entire Teira. But especially in times of challenge, in times of being under attack, under threat. So that's how I would approach it. What can we do to increase unity? Okay. Someone put it this way: why isn't more focus being put on how the Jews were behaving pre-October 7th as opposed to what our enemies did to us? We can control our behavior, but we can't dictate what our enemies choose to do. There was constant hate amongst us for over a year, predominantly judicial reform and just senseless hatreds we had among ourselves. I remember being in Israel August 2023, and there was an incident of a religious female and female soldier getting into a verbal fight on the train. This ultimately made headlines. If the Almighty created our enemies, why aren't we as people reflecting on how we need to pivot as a people? We had 1 year of infighting, protests, and riots in our land. If we had an enemy within, why do we have to wait for an enemy from outside to unite us? Could it be we were willing to hate each other so much that we all needed hostages to pray for daily to create greater love amongst us? I have to add to that, God forbid, God forbid. We certainly weren't willing to do it pre-October 7th. Well, I read it unfiltered. I can't agree with this tone. So I'll just say, let's talk about the positive here. Again, anything that we can look at ourselves. We're not talking about pointing fingers at others. We're talking about looking at ourselves. Anything you can do to increase in unity, we have to absolutely do. I made some suggestions. I'll make some more in answering the question what we can do. But it's not about putting focus, and I don't want to even put it in the same equation. Our enemies are enemies. And they don't have any justification, and we cannot blame ourselves for what they're doing to us. But we could look at ourselves. What can we do to be stronger when we're united? We know we are more invulnerable. So by all means, all this has to translate, instead of pointing fingers or criticizing ourselves or others or other groups, is about actually doing something positive. And this goes back to the suggestion I made about Shabbos. It's a consciousness thing. It's a conscientiousness thing of being aware and acting on it. You see someone, instead of ignoring, you see a child crying, go over and say, what can I do to help? You see an adult, let's cut out judgmentalism, criticism, condescension. The list goes on. And let us teach our children how to welcome people. And how to even disagree. Yes, disagree with love. There are many ways to do so. The Gemara talks about people who are disagreeing, but there's a love among them. You can love someone and have a different opinion. It can even have a very feisty and challenging debate, a lively debate, but at the end of the day, it's not personalizing. This is what we need more than ever, and actually the world needs it as well, so we need to serve as an example. So those are some of the points to be made regarding that issue. How can we help steer the Muslim fundamentalists to change course and live peacefully with their neighbors, as the Christians ultimately learned to do after centuries of aggression? Okay. So let's read this more in detail. Good evening. For hundreds and hundreds of years, Christians were our biggest adversaries, instigating pogroms and expulsions, but in the past few decades they lightened up a lot and now are much friendlier to us, and we generally peacefully coexist with them. What changed? What did they do to change and become more loving and accepting and less intolerant and violent? And how can we steer the Muslim fundamentalists to also change course and live peacefully with all their neighbors? Okay, well, if you look at the history of things, both Islam and Christianity before it, as the Rambam says, both came to liyasher, to pave the way toward Mashiach and toward unity, based on the Sheva Mitzvahs Brainwashed, based on biblical principles. Obviously, they've both gone through their own market corrections, to put it mildly, and growing pains. And indeed, it took a long time for a country like the United States to rise 250 years ago. And though built by Christians, not necessarily a Christian country, but it's based on the principles, biblical Torah principles, of the concepts of the universal laws, of Noahide laws of civilization. And indeed became a haven for the Jewish people and for other minorities and for religion in general and freedom of religion. Our fervent hope is that the same happened with the world of Islam. I'm sure I've met Muslims that are on that level, but it's still a minority. There has to be a revolution, and that's part of what this war really should be. Besides, obviously, protection and getting rid of any enemy that wants to kill you, ultimately to create a transformation. Yes, a cosmic and internal transformation, that you can be Muslim and be peaceful and live up to your great-grandfather Abraham's expectations of you. And pray for infidels instead of trying to kill them. And all these distortions, and obscene distortions, I don't even have the right words for it, that have turned it into literally savagery against human beings, innocent human beings, is not just anti-God. It's like antithetical in every possible way. So that has to be part of what is the demand and part of what the education system has to be transformed into. It's hard to say what it will take. With Christianity, it took time. It took patience. Yes, and it took knowledge. As ideas began to proliferate and people began to think and challenge their church's doctrines and the absolute authoritative approaches, which included extremely, some very cases, aggressive, violent, virulent anti-Semitism, things changed. What we have to do is keep on speaking the truth with clarity, and hopefully the seeds will be planted. Today with technology, a lot of things can happen. I myself have been on programs with Muslims who grew up hating Jews, but they never met a Jew. Then they did meet, and they came to learn, and some have been changed completely. I myself, in the videos that I do, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of Muslims watch them. I know that we could see it from their comments, we could see it from the demographics on YouTube where people watch and so on. Now, not all comments are positive, but many are. So we have to be articulate, not quiet about it, because the war of the mind, the war of the ideas, is as vital as the war on the ground, meaning the military war. So it's all part of our work. And indeed, the Jewish people have a mitzvah, just as the Rambam says, the end of chapter 8 in Hilchos Melachim, just as we have to keep the 630 mitzvahs as a mitzvah to influence the non-Jewish world to follow the 7 universal Noahide laws as they were given, and with the awareness that it was given at Sinai to Moshe from by God. So it's part of something we can do today. And the Rebbe, especially in the 80s, turned it into a whole hundreds and hundreds of pages dedicated just to that, hours and hours. Because today we can achieve that. Once upon a time, it was dangerous to even try that. Today it's something that people will welcome, the world will welcome, and they do welcome it. And again, I speak from experience. So we have work cut out for us. That's the real ultimate war. I wish there were leaders, political leaders, government leaders, business, any type of leaders that would understand this and call the world for this, call out the world. That's not just about don't kill others. Or we're threatening you with this deterrent, that deterrent. That's part of it. But more importantly, offer a vision for the world. Offer a vision for the whole world. In the words of Maimonides, a world that will be His entire business will be nothing but to know God. Like he says, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So someone else asked like this. Though questions regarding the topics discussed are many, I have a question that might be slightly sensitive. If I recall correctly, Rabbi, the rabbi has mentioned a particular religion is trying to take over. I might need to disagree on that point. The world seems to always have been in struggles, wars, etc. The positive side, though, is many nations are in the process of elevating their population in terms of education, economy, being open to other cultures. Maybe we do not see the progress yet. Eventually it will happen. So my answer is, or my response to this, is no, well, Muslim fundamentalism makes it very clear what their goal is. They feel they were chosen by God and they have to dominate the whole world, of course Israel. So there is that, that's not an illusion. You read Khattab, you read other of the big Muslim fundamentalist teachers. So that's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. But at the same time, I totally agree with you. The nations of the world have been moving closer and closer to the vision of what God wants of them. This is far from a perfect world. But there are many areas you see that progress. You see it in the area of political freedoms, religious freedoms, the area of humanitarian efforts, charity, and the list goes on. Okay. Before Mashiach's coming, do we need to first endure difficulties? Or as someone put it, the teaching of Chassidus says the olive must be crushed to produce oil. Yes, Chassidus cites it, but it's from the Gemara actually, from the Talmud. In other places, oil is compared to Mashiach, as Mashiach will be anointed with oil. Does this mean in order for Mashiach to come first, the state of Israel will have to be crushed by Iran? I probably shouldn't even have read that. The answer is absolutely no. First of all, we've been told that we've been crushed more than enough. And the Mittler Rebbe says, Lo yeh, there won't be anything more after what we've gone through already. So all the crushing has happened. The kos is slamoyer. In general, yes, has that crushing brought out deeper strengths and resources? Absolutely. But no, we don't need anything more. Even what we're seeing now, in the Rebbe's words, he would be saying, and I'm not putting words in his mouth, that's what the Rebbe said, I don't understand why this is happening. But after the fact, obviously we have to do whatever is possible to dig deeper and reveal greater strengths to counter anything that challenges us. So that's how I would approach it. So no, we don't need it, but if it comes our way, we will actually make it a force that will be kashayana esam ken yirba v'chen yifritz. The more they were afflicted, the more they blossomed and flourished and thrived. Okay. What can we do to wake up people who have been brainwashed by a false alternative narrative? Good question. And we'll go into some more details in a moment. What can we do? Well, I'll just speak from my experience and from what people have told me, their experience as well. Whenever you discuss any idea with anyone, you have to determine whether there's any point in this conversation. So I'll just go through the spectrum here. There are people, I'll go from the bottom up, that pretty clear from the outset or after at least a little time, there's no one to talk to. They have preconceived notions, prejudices and biases. They think whatever they're saying is a fact. Is it coming from ignorance, from arrogance, from closed-mindedness, maybe all the above, maybe more? And if that's the case, unless they're threatening or someone that they're dangerous, you could smile and be civil, but there's nowhere to go because you're not going to get very far. They will not change their mind. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but at some point you don't want to beat a dead horse, as they say. Maybe that's not a sensitive expression. But basically you have to determine where to fight, to choose your battles. So when you're naive and idealistic, you think you can change everyone's mind with an argument. You find that not everybody. Then there are people who are receptive. They may have a position, but you could see there's a certain receptivity. I would generally suggest being kind, being sensitive, and always being positive. And try to find an opening. If it's someone you love or someone that's a family member, obviously you give even more time and chance. But you have to make these decisions. So always be kind, but the question is how much you're really going to influence. Now there are people who are just simply ignorant and really don't know. They just need to hear a case being made for something. There's also the expression Dam Asher Toshev means you need to know the answers. That doesn't mean you always have to share those answers. That depends on who you're speaking to. And even if the people you're speaking to, it's not what you say, it's how you say it and to whom you say it. Every person, Chanech L'Nar Pidarke, has to be spoken to on their level. So all that's part of this conversation. Can you actually change someone who's been brainwashed? It's happened, and I'm sure it could happen. Sometimes it happens in a very backdoor way. I've seen this. I've invited people to my table, and I didn't want to debate with them, and I knew what their positions were. And after a while, they saw that I'm like a nice person, someone they like to be with, so they become more receptive without me going directly for the jugular. So all these are part of the methods. We're not talking about manipulation, obviously. We're talking about kindness, talking about dvarim hayesim in alev, words from the heart. That's in general. Now, there are times where they say sometimes that a mugged liberal becomes a conservative. Sometimes people's experience, they come to learn on their own. So you try to plant as many seeds as you can, that's what I do, and see where it goes. And sometimes more effect, sometimes less effect. You don't always see your effects. I've seen situations, things I've said to someone years ago, and years later, they came around. And it wasn't directly. I probably opened some doors, planted some seeds, and then the time came, something happened where they had an epiphany. Okay, now with that, let's take this to the next step. So someone asked, can we use recent events, for example, the recent plot to attack a popular music concert, Iran's accusations to help bring Iran's threats, and other similar events, can we use them to help bring clarity to those that have been indoctrinated? So let me read it more in detail. There's an American pop singer, I don't like to use names here, who recently had a music concert scheduled in Vienna, in Austria. I don't listen to her music because it's not my style, but she's very popular. The police in Austria just uncovered a plot by ISIS terrorists to do a chemical attack on our concert and kill as many innocent people as possible. Thankfully, the police thwarted the attack and arrested the perpetrators. This event clearly defines the difference between good and evil, and it should be a wake-up call to all protesters, to all the protesters that wave Hamas and ISIS flags. If someone needs to harm innocent people to glorify their God, then their God is cesspool. I don't want to even use these words. And those waving the flags of terrorists are covered with stink. How can we use this incident to convince more people on college campuses that Israel is fighting for the good side and the terrorists are fighting for the evil side? Okay. Well, hopefully events like this will wake some people up. But if they don't wake them up and you know someone that you think these events could help, try it out. Again, do it with a certain measure. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So my answer is case by case. If events like this wake somebody up, then by all means. I mean, I wish we didn't have to rely on such events, tragic events, especially not tragedies themselves. Here, at least, just a threat. Just like the wake-up call that came when the assassination attempt on the former President Trump. Should be a wake-up call to this country, as we discussed. That's regarding that. Someone else writes, I heard a quote attributed to the Baal Shem Tov that if you point a finger at someone, you are pointing three fingers back at yourself. The lessons is that subconsciously, when you see negative traits in others, those are really traits you need to improve upon in yourself. Karl Marx took this idea to an extreme and wrote that a great diversion to achieve a success in politics is to accuse your opponents of the negative things that you yourself are doing. We can see this in the actions of Iran, who accused Israel of occupying Palestine, while its Iranian regime, that it is the Iranian regime that is illegally occupying Persia. The real leader of Persia is the Shah Reza Pahlavi, who was ousted in a coup by the Khomeini Islamic terrorists in 1979. The Shah writes about the coup in his book, How I Ran from the Iran I Ran. Today, too many people are subscribing to the lies about Israel spread by Iran and their proxies. What can we do to help reset the world and align people with the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov so that it can be clear to see which side is the truth and which side are the lies? So that large groups of people who are inherently good can't be deceived into fighting for the wrong side, the side of evil. Well, same thing as we spoke about with the concert. If these events wake people, Kop kann nicht darauf stehen, they say. You can't put a mind on people's shoulders. But if these events can help someone wake up, by all means, and they should. I mean, it's pretty clear. Anyone that looks at the real story and not the false narratives, what does Iran want from Israel? What is this, and using its proxies? So you start realizing everything they accuse, they themselves are guilty of. So this is, but those that see clearly. Those that don't see clearly, if you can use these events to help, again, try. That's all I really can say about this. Okay, let us see what else. I think we will, I'll read one more, since there was the presidential election discussion about me endorsing and not endorsing. So I got a letter which I thought it would be good to read, a little refreshing. Instead of criticizing, it says like this: Dear President election, dear person who keeps writing to a Torah broadcast, asking Rabbi Jacobson to endorse a political candidate for president. It doesn't say anywhere in Chassidus that we must endorse candidates. It says Hashem runs the world. Whoever wins the presidency, it doesn't matter. We still must do our job to bring Mashiach. I'm sure if Rabbi Jacobson wanted to endorse a candidate, he would endorse Hashem because Hashem runs the world. Perhaps if you're not satisfied with the lack of political talk on a Torah broadcast, after you listen to this Torah broadcast, you can listen to a political show on the radio until you are satisfied. Thanks and have a nice day. Okay, I appreciate that. It does echo some of my feelings, but I already shared them in the previous programs. And finally, someone writes, and we'll conclude with this: if Mashiach comes before the USA presidential election, would there still be a presidential election, or would Mashiach, acting in his capacity as king of the entire world, negate the need for a presidential election? Very good question. Will there be presidents? Will there be leaders? Will there be heads of state, prime ministers, premiers? I would say there will be. That's why it says, so there will be leaders, but they'll be focused toward what God wants them to do. Mashiach is the ultimate spiritual leader, like a Moshe Rabbeinu, Goel Rishon, Goel Achrin, that leads the world, especially in the spiritual vision. But you'll still need, you'll need to have utilities, and you may need to facilitate other needs that people have. So there'll be community leaders and leaders in communities, in cities, in states, in countries, and all over the world. That seems to be right, but that's not the contradiction. Just like among the Yiddish leaders themselves, you could have Nesiim, leaders of different tribes, and still have one Nasi, Mashiach, of all the tribes, of all the Yidden and of the entire world. Main thing is we should be Zeicha ready as we go from Chamisha Asabov into the Gula, Mitzis, Vashlema, and we should be Zeicha to merit actually having it down here below. The Eibishter should protect Yidden everywhere. The Eibishter should free the hostages unscathed and protected, and we should only hear good news. Everyone have a very good week. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. And if we can say about Chamisha B'Asavav, a Guten Yontif, and it's Gematria Ksiva V'Chsima Teva. So we could already begin wishing that. Be well.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.